The courthouse smelled of old wood and cold judgment. I stood frozen near the oak-paneled entrance of courtroom 4B, heart pounding as the bailiff called our case. Caldwell versus Caldwell. My name echoed like a cruel joke. I clenched my hands tighter around the smooth leather of my bag. Across the room, Graham sat tall in his tailored charcoal suit, flanked by a small army of high-powered attorneys from Denver's most expensive law firm. His mother, Vivian, regal and cold as ever in her cream designer suit, sat smugly behind him. On his right, Sloane Carter, the assistant who had somehow become much more, scanned her phone with perfect indifference. The judge's gavel fell sharply. "Mr. Caldwell, you may proceed," Judge Mackenzie stated. Graham stood, smoothly, turning to face the court and me. "Your Honor," he began, his voice honeyed with practiced charm, "I am here seeking a fair dissolution of my marriage. Mrs. Caldwell and I have been separated for months. I have provided a generous settlement offer." His lawyer, Mr. Harrington, nodded approvingly, "but she refuses to accept reality." He paused dramatically before delivering the final blow. "Audrey has never worked a real job. Her only interest in this divorce is to claim wealth she had no part in building." A sharp, collective gasp rippled across the silent courtroom. I felt my stomach tighten painfully. I had imagined betrayal. I had even imagined humiliation. But nothing prepared me for hearing my life, my sacrifices, reduced to a lazy gold digger's stereotype in front of strangers. I watched Graham's cold gray eyes flicker with self-satisfaction. Vivian gave a small nod, tapping her manicured fingers against the polished wood bench. My lawyer, Marilyn Chin, leaned toward me and whispered firmly, "Stay calm. You've got the truth, Audrey." I took a shaky breath. The world slowed. 9 years of exhaustion, working multiple jobs, paying bills alone while Graham played entrepreneur. 9 years of sleepless nights and cheap dinners and saving every dime so his company, Caldwell Logistics Systems, could survive. I stood slowly. My legs trembled slightly, but my voice was clear. "Your Honor," I said, drawing the envelope from my bag. My fingers brushed against the heavy paper, cold but reassuring. "I would like to submit this prenuptial agreement, signed by Mr. Caldwell in Paris, France." Everything stopped. The words hung in the air, heavy and deadly. Graham's expression shifted from confidence to confusion to alarm. Vivian stiffened visibly. Sloane finally looked up from her phone, her sharp eyes narrowing. "I beg your pardon?" the judge asked, surprised. I walked forward, every step anchoring me more in my decision. I handed the envelope to Marilyn, who stepped forward with the quiet assurance of a woman who had seen many men like Graham fall apart on the stand. "This is dated, notarized, and signed during the couple's honeymoon in Paris," Marilyn said calmly. The courtroom erupted into gasps and murmurs. Graham's lawyers huddled together furiously. Graham himself paled as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Vivian froze, her mask of control cracking for just a fraction of a second. I inhaled deeply, standing straighter as Judge Mackenzie flipped open the sealed document. I wasn't scared anymore. For the first time in 9 years, I felt the faintest spark of something unfamiliar, power. 9 years earlier, the warm spring air of Denver still held a chill as I stepped into the cavernous ballroom of the annual Rocky Mountain Business Conference. I was 27, ambitious, laser-focused, and newly promoted to senior analyst at Rocky Mountain Capital. My colleagues teased me for attending the event so early in my career. "Networking, Audrey," my boss had said that morning, sliding the crisp invitation across my desk. "You're going places." The ballroom was a glittering blur of tailored suits, cocktail dresses, and conversations layered over the soft clink of champagne glasses. That's when I saw him, standing near the edge of the crowd with a laptop bag slung casually over his shoulder, messy brown hair falling into his eyes, pitching his idea to anyone who would listen. His passion was undeniable. His words drew me in before I even realized I was moving closer. An automated logistics system for small to mid-sized companies, he explained, his voice dancing with excitement. The big guys have tools. Small businesses deserve the same edge. Our eyes met for the first time. I'm Graham Caldwell, he smiled warmly, extending his hand. Audrey Prescott, I replied, still going by my maiden name then. Something about him, the quiet confidence, the wild optimism, made me smile back. What started as business talk drifted effortlessly into conversation over coffee at a nearby cafe after the event. He confessed that funding was his greatest obstacle. Nobody wants to invest in a concept that exists only on paper, or worse, on a half-broken laptop. He laughed softly, embarrassed. 3 months later, when that very laptop finally died, I didn't hesitate. I bought him a brand new one with my bonus check. It's not charity, I insisted when he tried to refuse. It's an investment in us. He pulled me close that night under the soft glow of Denver streetlights. I'll pay you back tenfold, Audrey. You won't regret this. Those first 2 years were a whirlwind, coffee-fueled nights, scribbling plans and projections on our tiny apartment's walls, and me running spreadsheets at 1 a.m. to help him polish pitch decks. I balanced my demanding corporate job with supporting Graham's startup dream. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like partnership. We were a team, building something no one else believed in yet. I still remember the cheap takeout meals, the late-night strategy sessions at our battered kitchen table, and the way his tired face would light up when some tiny breakthrough happened. One day, he promised, as we watched the city lights from our apartment window, this will all be worth it. I had believed him completely. The email came on a gray Tuesday morning. I sat at my desk overlooking downtown Denver, sipping stale office coffee when the notification popped up. Subject: Organizational changes, effective immediately. My heart sank. I read the carefully worded corporate euphemism over and over. I had been let go. Restructuring. Budget reallocation. My promotion track at Rocky Mountain Capital had vanished in a single sentence. Graham held me tightly that night as I cried into his worn flannel shirt. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise, he murmured, rubbing slow circles along my back. Now you can help me full-time. We can build Caldwell Logistics together. His voice was soft, hopeful, and I wanted so badly to believe him, so I nodded. That was the moment everything shifted. I traded business suits for diner aprons and customer service scripts. I found an administrative job at Westbrook Medical Center, half my previous salary. It wasn't enough to cover our rent and the ballooning development costs of his prototype. So I picked up weekend shifts at a local diner on Colfax Avenue, waiting tables for late-night crowds, then started driving for Ride Fast, shuttling strangers across Denver's endless grid after finishing my day job. Sometimes the night air bit through my worn coat as I stood outside in the freezing dark, waiting for passengers. Sometimes former colleagues slid into my back seat, recognition dawning slowly on their faces. Audrey, I thought you were still at Rocky Mountain. They'd trail off awkwardly. I would smile tightly and say what I had rehearsed 100 times. I left to help my fiancé build his business. It's our future. They always nodded, sympathetically, but I could see the pity behind their professional smiles. At home, Graham barely noticed my exhaustion. He lived in the glow of his code and algorithms, his prototype slowly taking shape at our kitchen table. The apartment was a mess of wires, sticky notes, pizza boxes, and coffee mugs. On rare nights, when our schedules aligned, he would excitedly update me on potential investors or a breakthrough with his logistics model while I soaked my aching feet in a tub of hot water, silently wondering how I could afford gas for the next week. Be patient, Audrey, he'd say, barely glancing up from his laptop. We're so close. It's all going to be worth it soon. I told myself the same thing, over and over, like a prayer I had no choice but to believe. I was tired, bone-deep tired, but I loved him, and I loved the dream we were supposed to be building together. I ignored the nagging voice inside me that whispered, "You're shrinking your entire world to fit inside his." The invitation had arrived like a golden ticket to a world we could barely afford. Graham's investor, a French venture capitalist, had agreed to meet him in Paris to discuss early-stage funding. Miraculously, the investor even offered to cover our travel expenses. "We deserve this, Audrey," Graham insisted as he packed his only suit. "We need this." I smiled weakly, hiding my anxiety behind practiced enthusiasm. Our bank account was overdrawn. My credit card was maxed. I had picked up 4 extra diner shifts the week before, just to afford a second pair of comfortable walking shoes. But I followed him onto the plane anyway, still believing. Paris was a dream blurred by exhaustion. While Graham disappeared for meetings that stretched long into the afternoons, I wandered alone through Montmartre and the narrow cobblestone streets near the Seine, searching for the magic the guidebooks promised, but feeling only emptiness. On our third night, Graham came back to the tiny hotel room glowing. "They loved the pitch," he said, throwing his arms around me. "We're celebrating tonight." We dined at a small bistro tucked away from the tourist crowds. Graham laughed more freely than I had seen in months. The champagne flowed far too generously. The candlelight softened the sharp lines of his dress. He was charming, brilliant, and drunk. When we stumbled back into the room, I helped him out of his jacket and shoes as he collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, mumbling something about our bright future. I sat there in the dim light for a long time, watching him sleep, the weight of 9 months of bills, late fees, and exhaustion settling heavily on my chest. I knew something then I hadn't admitted before. I needed protection. The next morning, while Graham snored off his hangover, I slipped away and walked down Rue de Rivoli to meet Julian Beaumont, a sharp American expat lawyer a local cafe owner had recommended to me just hours earlier. Julian specialized in contracts and international agreements. We sat over bitter coffee and drafted a prenuptial agreement unlike any other. It wasn't about greed. It wasn't about mistrust. It was survival. It acknowledged every dollar I had contributed to Caldwell Logistics Systems, every sacrifice I had made. It granted me a 49% ownership stake in the company, classifying my sweat equity alongside Graham's technical contributions. We added a clause making my share independent of any potential divorce settlement in case the unthinkable happened. That evening, back in our tiny room, I tucked the document inside a folder marked investment paperwork Graham needed to submit to his investor. He never questioned it. Still flushed from victory and floating on clouds of potential, he signed without reading the fine print. "To our future," he toasted with the last glass of leftover champagne. I smiled tightly and whispered, "Yes, to our future." In that moment, under the flickering yellow light of a cheap Parisian hotel, I didn't know if I had just saved myself or betrayed the last sliver of the partnership I had fought so hard to believe in. The transformation was slow at first, almost imperceptible. Caldwell Logistics Systems secured its first paying client just 6 months after Paris. A local distribution company signed on for a beta test, and soon word spread. 1 client became 3. 3 became 10. Investors who had once ignored Graham now lined up for a meeting. The money trickled, then poured. Our cramped apartment near Capitol Hill in Denver became too small. Graham signed a lease for a sleek glass office space downtown. "It's a new era," he beamed. "We've made it, Audrey." But there was no we anymore, not really. I still juggled 2, sometimes 3 jobs. Administrative assistant by day, diner waitress by night, ride-fast driver on weekends. Graham insisted every cent had to be reinvested into growth. "Be patient," he said dismissively when I asked if I could drop a shift or finally afford a new winter coat. "The big payday is coming." Yet I couldn't ignore the changes. The cheap hoodies and sneakers disappeared, replaced by custom-tailored suits and Italian leather shoes. He stopped coding at our kitchen table and started hosting business dinners at restaurants I had only seen in magazines. I noticed his cologne first. Expensive, sharp, unfamiliar. Then came the watch. A sleek, gleaming timepiece that cost more than our entire rent. "Impressions matter," he said casually when I stared at it in disbelief. "I can't look like a nobody." The final fracture came the night of the Caldwell Logistics office warming party. I arrived after my diner shift, exhausted but determined to celebrate this milestone we had fought so hard for. I wore my best dress, a 3-year-old clearance find, and had stayed up until 2 a.m. preparing homemade appetizers to bring. The office sparkled under bright halogen lights. Framed photos lined the walls. Graham shaking hands with clients, Graham accepting awards, Graham cutting the ribbon on the new office. No trace of me anywhere. "Can I help you?" a cool, polished voice interrupted. I turned to find her. Sloane Carter, 29, Stanford educated, with perfect posture, sleek chestnut hair, and an expression carved from ice. "I'm Audrey Caldwell," I offered, forcing a smile. "Graham's wife." Her perfectly shaped brow arched faintly. "Oh, fascinating. He rarely mentions his personal life at the office." The words hit harder than they should have. I looked down at the tray in my hands. Sloane nodded toward the break room. "You can set the food up in there. Graham's busy greeting investors." I stood frozen for a beat before obeying. Hours later, I watched from the sidelines as Graham laughed and sipped wine with his growing team. Vivian appeared late, sweeping into the room like royalty. She kissed her son on the cheek, straightened his tie, and whispered loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "I always knew you were destined for greatness." Then she turned to me with a brisk nod. "Audrey, the cheese plate needs refreshing. Be a dear." I bit my tongue hard enough to draw blood. That night, something inside me shifted. For the first time in 9 years, I realized I was no longer part of his universe. I was orbiting around it, unseen, unnecessary, expendable. The distance grew slowly, then all at once. Graham became a stranger who lived in my house. He stayed at the office later and later, his excuses shifting from apologetic to impatient. "Building a company requires sacrifice, Audrey," he snapped one night as I stood in the darkened kitchen, still wearing my diner uniform, waiting for him to come home. "You of all people should understand that." I stared at him, stunned, realizing I no longer did. His phone pinged with increasing frequency. He guarded it closely, stepping into hallways or turning away when he answered. Vivian visited the office almost daily now, trailing behind Graham during meetings, giving firm opinions on everything from office decor to marketing strategy. "Your mother seems very involved," I said cautiously. Graham waved a hand. "She knows people. It's called opening doors, Audrey. You wouldn't understand the business side." I swallowed my anger. I had once handled the company's books. I had once saved him from bankruptcy by picking up extra shifts at the diner when we couldn't afford a server upgrade. But now apparently I wouldn't understand. The final insult came on a rainy Tuesday. I decided to surprise him with lunch from his favorite Thai place. I walked into the sleek new Caldwell Logistics building, noticing the framed photos that had multiplied along the walls. Graham pitching to investors. Graham with his team at tech conferences. Graham accepting yet another business award. Not a single photo of me. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked with cool formality. "I'm here to see Graham Caldwell," I replied, heart sinking already. "His wife." The woman's eyes flickered briefly. "He's in meetings all afternoon. Perhaps you should have called first." I stood there, humiliated, clutching the takeout bag. I knew then what I had refused to admit for months. I didn't belong anymore. That night, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep on the couch, still in my uniform. Graham had left his phone on the coffee table in his rush that morning. I wasn't snooping, not really. But when it buzzed, the preview lit up. Sloane, working late again tonight. Ordered dinner from MyZone. Your favorite booth in the back. My heart clenched. My hands shook as I scrolled back dozens of messages. Inside jokes, flirty compliments, late-night confessions, the kind of intimacy that had long disappeared from our marriage. My breath caught in my throat. When confronted the next evening, Graham's denial was instant, almost rehearsed. You're being ridiculous. She's my assistant. That's literally her job. I stared at him in disbelief. At midnight, texting how good you looked in your blue suit. His expression hardened. This is why I can't discuss business with you. You're too emotional, too small-minded. The words landed like physical blows. The man who once celebrated my sharp instincts now spoke to me as if I were some hysterical child. I stood silent as the realization dawned, painfully clear. I was no longer his partner, not even his equal. I was just an inconvenient leftover from his old life. Weeks passed in numb monotony. My birthday came and went without acknowledgement. Our anniversary became just another Tuesday. The final confirmation arrived one cold night in January. I borrowed Graham's laptop to pay our utility bill, something I still handled despite the company's success. A document was minimized on the desktop. A lease agreement, luxury apartment downtown. Effective immediately. My hand hovered over the trackpad, stunned hollow. That night, Graham came home at 3 a.m. smelling of expensive cologne and worse, indifference. I sat frozen at the kitchen table. He didn't even try to lie this time. This isn't working anymore, he said flatly. We want different things. I whispered, or you and Sloane. His silence was answer enough. 2 days later, movers arrived. 3 weeks after that, divorce papers came by certified mail while I tied my apron strings for the morning diner's shift, ground cited as irreconcilable differences. The offered settlement, a one-time payment worth less than 6 months of Graham's new salary. My phone rang. It was Vivian. He's very busy, she said, smug satisfaction coating every syllable. The lawyers will handle everything. Frankly, dear, you should be grateful for his generosity. What exactly did you contribute, besides being a temporary support system? I stared at the wall for a long time after the call ended, then slowly, deliberately walked to the bookshelf. My fingers found the heavy spine of my college financial textbook. I pulled it free. Tucked deep inside the pages was the sealed envelope I had nearly forgotten about. The Paris prenuptial agreement. I stood holding it under the flickering kitchen light, and for the first time in months I smiled. The envelope felt heavier than it should have as I turned it over in my hands. Beneath the thin paper was the last tangible proof of everything I had poured into Graham's dream, and everything he now pretended had never existed. For a moment, doubt gnawed at me. Was I really ready to go to war with the man I had once loved enough to sacrifice everything for? But then I thought of Vivian's smug voice on the phone. I thought of Sloane in her designer suits, sliding into the life I had built. I thought of Graham's cold, dismissive stare across our crumbling kitchen table. I wasn't just ready. I was burning for it. That night, after my last shift at the diner, I dug through an old shoebox where I kept scraps of life I thought I'd never need again. Buried under faded receipts and worn-out pay stubs was a business card, Marilyn Chin Family Law and Asset Protection. I remembered her clearly, an elegant woman in her 50s, a regular customer at the diner, always leaving generous tips and smiling kindly at the staff. One night after closing, when I had been too exhausted to hide my misery, she had pulled me aside and said, "If you ever need real help, call me." It was almost midnight when I picked up my phone. My fingers hovered over the numbers before I pressed call. On the second ring, Marilyn answered, her voice alert but calm. "This is Marilyn Chin." I swallowed hard. "Ms. Chin, it's Audrey Caldwell. I don't know if you remember me." "Of course I remember you, Audrey," she said warmly. "What's going on?" The words tumbled out of me. The divorce papers, the years of unpaid labor, the silent erasure of everything I had built beside Graham. When I mentioned the prenuptial agreement, Marilyn's tone sharpened instantly. You have a prenup? Signed, notarized, and from Paris? Yes, I whispered, almost afraid to believe it could matter. Sealed and untouched since the day he signed it. There was a pause. You need to bring it to my office tomorrow. First thing. I want to see it. The next morning, I stood trembling in the marble-floored lobby of Chin and Associates, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. Marilyn greeted me herself, impeccably dressed in navy slacks and a crisp white blouse. She didn't offer false comfort. She didn't sugarcoat reality. She simply sat across from me, scanned the prenuptial agreement carefully, and then looked up with a gleam in her sharp eyes. This changes everything, she said quietly. Graham thinks he can erase you from the narrative, but this document says otherwise. I exhaled, the tight band around my chest loosening slightly for the first time in months. Can we win? I asked. We can fight, she corrected. And if you're willing to stand your ground, we can win more than just a settlement. We can reclaim your rightful share of everything you built. I hesitated only a second. I'm willing. Marilyn leaned back in her chair, studying me with the cool appraisal of a general inspecting a battered but determined soldier. Good, because this won't be easy. They'll come after you with everything they have. They'll paint you as lazy, entitled, irrelevant. I met her gaze squarely. They already have. That afternoon, as we laid out the first steps of our strategy, Marilyn warned me again about the uphill battle ahead. The endless depositions, the courtroom smears, the character assassinations. It's not fair, she said simply, but it's reality. Are you sure you're ready for that? I thought of the years I had spent erasing my own needs, silencing my own dreams to support Graham's. I thought of the countless late nights, the bruised feet, the empty bank accounts, the way he had smiled at Sloane across a crowded room while pretending I didn't exist. I've lived unfair for 9 years, I said steadily. I'm not backing down now. Marilyn smiled then, a small, fierce thing, and nodded. Then let's get to work. As I left her office that day, stepping into the crisp February air of downtown Denver, I realized something had shifted inside me. The grief was still there, of course. So was the anger. But now, threading through them both, was something stronger. Something that tasted a lot like hope and the faint, electric edge of revenge. The Denver County Courthouse loomed like a stone fortress the morning of our first court date. I arrived early, gripping my worn leather purse with white knuckles, the prenup sealed inside like a hidden weapon. Marilyn met me at the steps, calm as ever in a perfectly tailored navy suit. Remember what we discussed, she said gently as we walked through security. Stay calm. Answer only what's asked. Let me handle their attacks. I nodded stiffly, my stomach twisting into painful knots. The courtroom itself felt surreal, cold, impersonal. The heavy oak benches lined with strangers, their curious eyes flicking between me and Graham. And there he was, Graham Caldwell, my husband, my betrayer, dressed in an impeccable 3-piece suit that probably cost more than my entire year of wages. His army of 4 polished attorneys followed him, leather briefcases gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Sloane sat behind them, her expression blank, but victorious. Vivian arrived last, sweeping into the room like a queen taking her throne, her pearls catching the light as she took a protective seat behind her son. They're putting on a show, Marilyn whispered beside me. I clenched my jaw as Judge Eleanor Mackenzie entered, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes and no tolerance for theatrics. The trial began. Graham's lead attorney, Lawrence Harrington, was slick, experienced, and ruthless. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case, he announced confidently. My client seeks an equitable dissolution of his marriage. We have offered a generous settlement, which Mrs. Caldwell has inexplicably rejected. Marilyn rose immediately. We reject the term generous, Your Honor. My client supported Mr. Caldwell and Caldwell Logistics for 9 years. The proposed settlement is a fraction of her rightful share. The attack began swiftly. Harrington called Graham to the stand first, painting him as the self-made visionary who had built something from nothing. When the questioning turned to me, his tone shifted dramatically. Mr. Caldwell, what jobs did your wife hold during your marriage? Graham cleared his throat confidently. Audrey worked various small jobs, mostly service industry positions. Could you be more specific? Waitress, administrative assistant, rideshare driver. She did some early bookkeeping when the company was just an idea. Did she have any formal role at Caldwell Logistics Systems? Harrington asked smoothly. No, Graham replied firmly. We outgrew her skill set very early on. I stared at him from across the room, every word landing like a slap. 9 years of sacrifice reduced to small jobs and being outgrown. When my turn came, I sat stiff-backed under the sterile lights as Harrington tried to tear apart my work history. Mrs. Caldwell, can you tell the court your current employment situation? I work 3 jobs, I answered steadily. Administrative assistant during the day, waitress 4 evenings a week, rideshare driver on weekends. And your total income last year? Approximately $43,000. Harrington let the figure hang in the air before turning smoothly to the judge. Less than 1/10 of my client's current salary. Would you say financial considerations played a role in your marriage to Mr. Caldwell? Marilyn's voice cut through sharply. Objection, argumentative and offensive. Sustained, Judge Mackenzie said coldly, but the damage was done. I could see the narrative they were weaving. Graham, the successful provider, me, the gold-digging wife seeking a payday. I sat in the bathroom during recess, splashing cold water on my face, my hands shaking. Marilyn's voice steadied me as she leaned against the tiled wall. You're doing well. The judge is watching carefully. She doesn't buy their act. The afternoon session brought Vivian to the stand. Poised, calculated, cruel. Graham has always been exceptionally generous, she stated solemnly. He supported Audrey even when she chose less demanding work. I never saw her contribute anything of value to the business. She always seemed more focused on money than the company's mission. Her words twisted like knives. By late afternoon, the courtroom air had grown heavy and suffocating. The judge called a brief recess before closing arguments. I turned to Marilyn, my decision firm. We're not waiting anymore. I want to present the prenup now. She nodded once. Let's finish this. As the trial resumed, Harrington stood confidently at the podium, preparing his practiced closing speech. But before he could begin, Graham interrupted unexpectedly. Your Honor, may I speak directly? Judge Mackenzie raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Graham turned slightly, his voice rising. I built something meaningful, something that employs dozens of people and helps hundreds of small businesses. I did that, not Audrey. She's only after my wealth. She never even worked a real job. Silence crashed through the room. I stood. My hands no longer trembled. Your Honor, I said steadily, passing the envelope to Marilyn, who walked to the bench with the confidence of a woman delivering a fatal blow. I would like to submit this prenuptial agreement, signed by Mr. Caldwell in Paris, France, 7 years ago. Gasps rippled. Graham went white. Vivian's lips parted in stunned disbelief. Sloane froze, eyes wide. Harrington's expression crumpled. Judge Mackenzie adjusted her glasses and opened the document slowly. The moment had arrived. For the first time in 9 years, I had the power. The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Gasps, murmurs, the frantic rustle of papers. Across the aisle, Graham's carefully polished exterior shattered. His face drained of color as he whispered furiously to Harrington, who stared at the document as if it had turned to ash in his hands. Vivian clutched at her pearls, her fingers white at the knuckles, visibly trembling. Sloane sat frozen, lips slightly parted, eyes flicking nervously between them. "Order!" Judge Mackenzie barked, slamming her gavel sharply against the bench. The courtroom fell silent. "Mr. Harrington, were you aware of this document's existence?" Harrington hesitated. "Your Honor, this is the first we're hearing of any such agreement. We question its authenticity at this late stage." Marilyn smiled thinly. "The document is dated and notarized in Paris, France, Your Honor, signed by both parties. We're happy to have the court's handwriting expert verify Mr. Caldwell's signature if necessary." The judge flipped through the thick pages, her sharp eyes scanning the contents with growing interest. Finally, she lowered her glasses and addressed the courtroom. "This agreement acknowledges Mrs. Caldwell's financial contributions and sweat equity during the formation of Caldwell Logistics Systems, entitling her to a 49% ownership stake, independent of any divorce settlement." Another wave of shocked gasps. Graham looked as though the ground had vanished beneath him. Sloane stared down at her lap, her face pale and tight. Vivian sat stiff, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. "Furthermore," Judge Mackenzie continued firmly, given Mrs. Caldwell's significant ownership stake in the company, the motion for spousal support is denied as unnecessary. The parties will attend mediation to either structure an ongoing business relationship or arrange a fair market buyout of Mrs. Caldwell's interest. The gavel fell again. It was over. I walked out of that courtroom into the cool Denver air, my head held high, my heart still racing but steady. Marilyn squeezed my arm gently. "That went better than we could have dreamed." Reporters crowded outside, shouting questions. Marilyn expertly deflected them, while I stood silently, stunned by the magnitude of the moment. Then I heard his voice. "Audrey isn't speaking today," Graham said loudly, stepping from the courthouse, surrounded by his team. "This is a private matter. We'll resolve it professionally." I met his gaze for the first time since his bitter testimony and smiled. "Actually," I called out over the murmurs, "I think I've been silent long enough." I turned to the reporters, my voice clear and strong. Caldwell Logistics was built on partnership, sacrifice, and shared vision. Whether I stay involved will depend entirely on whether the commitment to that partnership continues. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my office at Caldwell Financial Consulting, overlooking the same Denver skyline I had once dreamed of escaping. The buyout had taken months of tense negotiations. I held firm. Graham had no choice but to agree. The settlement gave me the capital to launch my own firm, helping women entrepreneurs secure funding and protect themselves from the very traps I had nearly lost everything to. I had turned my greatest heartbreak into purpose. My assistant knocked gently on the door. "Your 5 o'clock is here, and these just arrived." She placed a simple glass vase of white lilies on my desk, along with a small envelope. I opened it slowly. "Congratulations on the Forbes feature. You deserve the recognition. G." I stared at the note for a long moment, then tucked it back inside the envelope without a word. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as charred reminders. That evening, as I walked into a cozy restaurant downtown to meet friends, real friends who had stood by me when everything fell apart, I laughed freely for the first time in years. The weight I had carried so long was finally gone. I had reclaimed my voice, my life, my worth. And this time, I wouldn't let anyone silence it again.